However, they have done just that. They have openly told all of us that they are perfectly okay with screwing over American homebuyers. This might sound like hyperbole or a joke, but it's actually true. Let me show you some headlines. Justin Trudeau says Canada should take advantage of higher U.S. interest rates. Now, we all know that this is taking advantage of the situation in the United States and making it more difficult for our friends, our allies, our neighbors to buy homes in Canada. But what does he mean by take advantage? Well, let's look at another headline. Trudeau says Canada must use high U.S. mortgage rates to lure buyers away from America. And then finally, Freeland says she wants more Americans to buy Canadian real estate. So these aren't isolated comments here. This is a concerted effort to screw over American home buyers. And the only thing that they do want us to do is to call it for what it is. They do want us to realize that they're trying to put up barriers to keep money from flowing into Canada because they know that is wrong. So they'll say, oh, it's not a big deal. Oh, it's just an opinion. No, it's not just an opinion. It's actually quite nefarious what they're trying to do. And it's going to be very harmful to people. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I'm a real estate investor based out of Toronto, Canada. So let me ask you a question. What is going on in the world today that makes the leaders of the Liberal Party of Canada think it's okay to try to make it more difficult for Americans to buy real estate in Canada? Well, the answer is simple. In 2022, we saw the housing market slow down dramatically due to rising interest rates. And as interest rates rose in Canada, interest rates also rose in the United States. However, there was a huge difference between the two countries. In Canada, the Bank of Canada raised their overnight rate by 3.5 percentage points, which led to mortgage rates increasing from about 2.5% to over 6%. In the United States, on the other hand, the Federal Reserve only raised interest rates by 4.5 percentage points. This means that mortgage rates went from around 3% to just under 7%. Even though the increase in rates was almost identical between the two countries, the starting point was much lower in the United States. And the reason why that is important is because the increase in rates had a much bigger impact on Canadians than it did on Americans. So, when you look at the cumulative effect of those rate hikes, the housing markets were affected very differently. Here in Canada, home prices fell by roughly 15 to 20% in most parts of the country. In the United States, on the other hand, home prices remained relatively flat, only seeing a small decrease of about 3 to 5%. And that's really the heart of the issue. Why is the Liberal Party of Canada so excited about higher U.S. interest rates? Because that means that home prices in the United States are staying high while home prices in Canada are falling. And if we can capitalize on this disparity, we could see a lot more Americans buying property here in Canada. And the reason why this is such a big deal is because Canadians can't buy property in the United States. You see, even though we have free trade between the two countries, we don't have the ability to buy houses. It's not allowed. But Americans can come up to Canada and they can buy properties here. They can invest their money here because we allow foreign investment in Canada. So even though our leaders might not want to admit it, what they doing is they trying to make it harder for Americans to buy property here in Canada. And that's why they don't want to call it for what it is. Now, before I go any further, I want to make it clear that I am not a fan of Americans coming up to Canada and buying up all of the real estate. I am not a fan of foreign investors coming in and making it more difficult for Canadians to afford homes. And I'm not a fan of the fact that we allow this to happen. But the reality is that it's already too late. We can't change what's happened in the past. So instead, I'd rather focus on the future and look at how we can protect Canadians from being screwed over. And that's exactly what's happening here. If you look at the data, you can see that the number of Americans buying property in Canada has been steadily increasing since 2017. And in 2022, we saw a record 29,000 Americans buy property here in Canada. And the problem is that these Americans aren't just buying up affordable homes. They're buying up luxury homes. On average, the price of a home bought by an American in Canada is $1.3 million. That's more than double the median home price in the country. And in places like Vancouver and Toronto, the average sale price to an American buyer is over $1 million. Now, I'm sure you're asking yourself, why would Americans be buying up luxury homes here in Canada? And the answer is simple. In most parts of Canada, it's cheaper to buy a luxury home than an affordable home in the United States. Let me show you some examples. In Vancouver, the median home price is about $1.3 million, which is about £870 sterling. In Toronto, the median home price is about $970,000, which is about £650,000 sterling. And in places like Los Angeles, The median home price is over $1.3 million. That's over £900,000 sterling. So if you're an American billionaire looking to buy a second home, it makes sense to buy in Canada because you can get a lot more for your money. You can buy a mansion with a pool and a view for the same price that you would pay for a 2-bedroom condo in the middle of nowhere. And that's exactly what's happening. In fact, according to a recent study, the number of Americans buying luxury homes in Canada has increased by 50% in the last year. And the worst part is that most of these Americans don't even pay in Canadian dollars. They pay in US dollars, which means that they're getting an even better deal today than they were a year ago. You see, in 2022, the Canadian dollar was trading at about 75 cents US. But today, the Canadian dollar is trading at about 70 cents US. This means that an American only has to spend 70 cents US to get a Canadian dollar, which makes everything cheaper for them. So if they were willing to spend $1 million on a house in Vancouver a year ago, now they can get a $1.4 million house. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who cares if they buy expensive homes? It doesn't affect me. And that's where you're wrong, because when they buy these expensive homes, they're bidding up the prices of other homes. In fact, according to the same study, the number of Americans buying homes under $750,000 has increased by over 100% in the last year. And when these Americans come in and start bidding up the prices of affordable homes, it makes it more difficult for regular Canadians to afford homes. It puts upward pressure on prices and it drives up the cost of living. Now, I know that sounds like hyperbole, but it's actually true. You see, since 2017, we've seen the number of Americans buying homes in Canada increase by over 50%. And during the same time period, we've seen home prices increase by over 50% as well. Coincidence? I think not. Now, I am not saying that all Americans are bad and that we shouldn't allow any of them to buy homes in Canada. What I am saying is that we need to protect Canadians from being priced out of the market. And the best way to do that is to stop the wealthy Americans from coming in and buying up all of the affordable homes. We need to put policies in place that protect Canadians first and foremost. And if we don't do that, then we're just going to continue to see home prices rise, and more Canadians are going to be priced out of the market. So let us hope that our leaders are smart enough to realize this and do something about it before it is too late. Thanks for watching.
Here be monsters both foul and fair. A siren calls, inviting you to her side with song and sweet promises. But should you heed her call, your fate would be sealed. Madness and death would surely follow. Be warned, the landlubbers, for this is no fairy tale. This be the dark reality of life at sea in the 17th century, where every wave that crashes upon the deck carries with it the threat of insanity and despair. Welcome aboard, mateys. Today we be hoisting the sails and setting a course for uncharted waters as we explore the hidden struggles of the men who dared to brave the seas in the 17th century. For behind the swashbuckling adventures and tales of daring do lie the haunting shadows of a lesser-known epidemic, one that threatens to capsize even the steeliest of nerves. Are you with me? Then batten down the hatches and prepare yourself for a journey that will test not only our courage, but also our sanity. Let's dive right in. Life at sea during the 17th century was a perilous adventure. Pirates, storms, disease, mutiny, shipwrecks, they were all a part of the daily dangers faced by those who sailed the high seas. And amidst these perils, the crew of a ship had their own personal demons to confront. They were plagued by something just as dangerous as any storm or siren madness. Now you might be scratching your head wondering what I'm on about. I mean, come on, isn't that a bit dramatic? Well, let me tell you, it's as real as the salty spray in your face and just as unpredictable as the waves crashing against the hull. You see, the crew of these ships weren't just hardened sailors. They were volunteers, often enticed by the promise of adventure and fortune. But the reality was far from the romanticized image of swashbuckling pirates and intrepid explorers. In the cramped, dark and unsanitary conditions below deck, with the constant threat of danger lurking around every corner, many of them lost their minds. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? But the evidence is as solid as the anchor that holds our ship to the seabed. One of the most valuable resources we have is the ship's logbook. This is where the captain of the ship recorded everything that happened on his voyage, from the mundane to the miraculous. And guess what he recorded here? Well, In some cases, he documented instances of his crew going insane. Take, for instance, the voyages of Captain John Smith, the legendary explorer who charted the course of early English colonization in North America. During his time, he kept meticulous records of his adventures. And in those records, he mentioned several crew members who suffered from severe mental breakdowns. Imagine the pressure of being in an unfamiliar, unforgiving environment, cut off from everything familiar, with the constant threat of death looming over you. It's enough to make anyone feel a little uneasy. But it wasn't just the fear and isolation that drove these men to the brink. Oh no, there was more to it than met the eye. You see, life on board a ship in the 17th century was a test of endurance. The food was scarce and often rotten, the water was a breeding ground for disease, and the air was thick with the stench of waste and decay. To say it was a less than ideal living condition would be a horrific understatement. And then there was the lack of sleep. The crew had to work around the clock, often without rest, to keep the ship on course. And when they finally had a moment to catch their breath, the cacophony of sound below deck made it nearly impossible to get a wink of shut-eye. Picture the constant creaking of the ship, the crashing of the waves, the shouts of the crew, and the eerie cries of seagulls. It was a symphony of chaos that would make even the most seasoned sailor yearn for the quiet solitude of their own cabin. But the worst part of it all was the darkness. The dim oil lamp lighting, the way below deck cast eerie shadows that danced and flickered on the walls, creating an illusion of movement in the darkness. It was as if the very ship itself was alive and breathing, taunting the crew with its unseen presence. And when the nights were long and dark, the darkness took on a life of its own, seeping into the minds of the crew and twisting their thoughts until they were nothing more than shadows of their former selves. Now I know what you're thinking. Surely it couldn't have been that bad, right? Well, let me tell you, it was so bad that it became a common sight to see crew members stripped naked, running around the deck babbling incoherently or jumping into the sea to swim alongside the ship, believing they could steer it better from the water. Some even resorted to eating their own excrement, mistaking it for food. It was a desperate and disturbing sight, a testament to the toll that life at sea was taking on their minds. What's more, there were cases of sailors biting chunks out of their own flesh, either because they thought they were saving themselves from an impending attack by an imaginary enemy, or because they couldn't distinguish between reality and illusion. Others would sit for hours staring into the distance, muttering to themselves or singing songs that made no sense whatsoever. But the most heartbreaking cases were those of the sailors who turned on each other in a fit of madness, killing their fellow crew members before harming themselves. It was a grim reminder that even in the darkest depths of hell, there was still darkness to be found. These weren't just isolated incidents, mind you. They were so widespread that it was common knowledge among sailors that if you went on enough voyages, you'd eventually witness such horrors. So what did they do when such madness struck? Well, they had to take drastic measures. In the face of such disturbing behavior, the captains and crew were left with only two options, really. Either they tied up the affected sailors and locked them up below deck, or they threw them into the sea, leaving their fate to the mercy of the waves. There was no other recourse for them. No medicine, no therapy, just the cold embrace of the ocean. But it wasn't just the crew who suffered from these fits of madness. Sometimes it struck the very people tasked with keeping order and sanity on board, the officers and the ship's doctor. Yes, even the supposed healers of the high seas weren't immune to the clutches of insanity. Imagine being the ship's doctor, a man of science and reason, sworn to help and heal. Yet when the darkness envelops you, what use are your medical texts and instruments? What good can they do against the shadows that twist and turn in your mind? Take, for example, the story of Simon Paulin, the ship's surgeon aboard the Mayflower, the very ship that carried the first pilgrims to the New World. According to the ship's logbook, Paulin became so mentally unstable that he started cutting off his own balls, believing that it would cure him of his melancholy. Can you imagine a more chilling image than that? So how did the men of the 17th century deal with such a predicament? Well, they didn't have the luxury of understanding the complexities of mental illness, nor did they have the means to treat it. In their eyes, a man who cut off his own balls wasn't just mentally unwell. He was a danger to himself and everyone around him. So what did they do? They tossed him overboard without a second thought. Such stories might seem extreme and even unbelievable, but they are testament to the power of the sea and the human psyche. In the face of such overwhelming odds, who knows what horrors might lurk beneath the surface? So remember, when you hear the call of the wild waves and the salty winds whisper tales of adventure, tread carefully. For the sea, like the mind, is a vast and mysterious realm where darkness can engulf even the brightest of souls. Well, there you have it, mateys. The unsettling truth about the men who dared to navigate the treacherous waters of the 17th century. Their tales are a haunting reminder that the greatest battles are not always fought on the deck, but within the depths of the human mind. If you enjoyed this voyage into the shadowy depths of maritime history, be sure to leave us a like and a comment below. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on our latest adventures. Until next time, stay safe and remember, the sea may be unforgiving, but the darkness within can be even more so.